Welcome to Allies or Enemies. I'm Jess.
And I am Sean, and today we are talking about Luthier, and our copy was provided for review, but the thoughts in this video are all our own.
Luthier is a 1 to 4 player game designed by Beck and Burson, with art by Vincent Dutrait. And in Luthier, it is a fairly heavy worker placement game where you are playing as luthiers, which is a term for the maker of classical instruments. Let's look at how it plays.
This is a big game, so this will be a broad overview, but you start the game with a player board, an instrument, a patron, a few workers, a couple of goals, and a family tile, which will give you a few resources and a special bonus. At the start of each round, everyone gets stuff from their patrons, then they take turns committing their workers to locations, and then they take turns choosing locations to resolve. And when you choose a location, it means everyone resolves that location in the order of their worker strength. And these locations do things like gaining patrons, which you can later work to fulfill, gain instruments, which you will build to give to patrons and take over chairs in the orchestra, fix instruments to help fulfill patron orders and to add tokens to the orchestra, perform to also add tokens to the orchestra and fill patron orders, visit the balcony to change player order and complete goals, visit your workbenches to first rough and then finish instruments, and visit the market to buy and sell resources. There are also special workers and tracks and a whole bunch of other stuff, but the purpose of all of this is to fulfill patron orders, get your family's instruments into the orchestra, and complete personal and public goals. At the end of 6 rounds, you'll have a bunch of points you earned throughout the game, and then you'll add to that points for first chairs, personal goals, patron powers, special workers, and a couple of extra points for leftover resources and unfinished instruments. And then the greatest luthier is named.
So at each place, what you're doing is relatively simple, but the complexity really comes from trying to do everything in the right order and most efficiently.
Yeah, this really is an efficiency puzzle, and it's an efficiency puzzle in which the other players are really going to mess with that order. And I think that is the thing that I find most interesting in this game, is that as you resolve each one of those locations, well, you don't really have a say in which ones you're going to do when, because you're going to go around and decide, I'm going to resolve this, and now everyone who's there has to resolve that right now. So it really is a matter of, first you're planning out everything of, I need this to go there and get them, and then I need this instrument, and then I'm going to do this. But also, that's probably not going to happen. So being able to kind of change that on the fly.
Yeah, you definitely have to be able to do that. And the nice thing is that each spot does give you an alternative action. So if you no longer have an option available for the cards, the other options are at least pretty strong. But the other thing you sometimes might have to do is, if you really want a particular card, you might play a really high value token there, but it may turn out no one else ended up going there. You're like, what a waste of that high value one.
Yeah, there are a lot of, I think probably most of the decision making really happens in putting out those tokens, because like you say, it is putting out that high value one, because you want kind of to put those early, because if 2 people tie, whoever's on the bottom of that pile gets to go first. But also you kind of want to save that, because like you say, you don't want to go somewhere where no one else is going. So you probably want to put that on top of a pile. And then also it's that you really have to think out your next 3 or 4 or then 5 as you get later in the game actions. And you've got to be able to think of that whole thing. You can't really just be like, yeah, I might want to like fix an instrument sometime this turn.
Yeah, so you really have to be planning everything out. And there's so many levels to it as well. Like, for example, if you're picking your instrument, you want an instrument that one of your patrons wants, but you also want it to be an instrument where it hasn't been made yet, because then you'll get first chair. So there is a lot to consider.
Yeah, and that first chair thing is a big thing as well, because that is worth a lot of points at the end of the game. And I like
The thing about the patrons too, because you were saying about how you want to please them before they fall off, but there's an interesting thing where you kind of want to keep them for at least a little bit because they've got really strong beginning of round bonuses. So as they get slightly more impatient, they give you more stuff to hopefully, I guess, to like speed up the process. So like, here's a little bit of money, please, if you can make my violin. But you can only do that a couple of times and then they lose any interest and they just go away and you lose them. You do not want to do that.
Yeah, but it is a bit of a tricky situation because for those patrons that have like 3 requirements, they're taking up space for quite a bit of time that you really have to try and fulfill like those 3 things. And whereas sometimes it's nice if you just get a patron that only wants an instrument because you make their instrument and then they're satisfied and you get the points for the patron right then.
And you get their bonus as well. And some of those bonuses are really good too.
Yeah, and usually the ones that give you the better payoff do have the more requirements, which means it's going to take you a few rounds to finish them. But the earlier you can do it, then the more rounds you'll get those bonuses for. And I do really like that the patrons' requirements aren't like a specific instrument. It is just a type of instrument, which I think is quite nice because that can be a challenge.
And so it's not that hard to find something that fits into one of those categories. And you know as well going in that percussion is a little bit less common, and then wind is kind of in the middle, and strings are out all the time. There's just a ton of string instruments that you can choose from. So you already have a bit of a sense of that rarity as well. And so I like that you're not totally at the mercy of the draw. You've got pretty good odds.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I do like that there are a few different ways to use the resources as well. Because if you happen to have built up a bunch of resources, you're capped at having 9 of them. And you may not have a lot that right now that you're working on, like building or roughing, that need a lot of them. But that means you can repair instruments. And putting out those repair or performance tokens can be really good because you might be able to have first chair, which gets you that stronger bonus, or at the end, if you still have more tokens than other people have tokens, that also counts as having first chair.
Yeah, and I do really like the tightness of those resources too. Most of the time, you're going to be like, how do I get more resources? How am I going to have just enough that I can make these things? There's also those tracks as well that are interesting. And I like that you're building up, like that's part of your building up your engine too. And you've got those 3 different tracks. You're not going to use all of them generally in a game, but those are going to get you those special different workers, and they're going to just make you better at those different actions.
Yeah, but only if you play a high enough value. So that's another consideration, is which location you want the bonus for playing a high value. And what's neat about the resources is you can always go to the market once each round. And I really like that it doesn't take one of your action tokens to go to the market. You can just choose at one point on your turn that for your turn, you're going to go to the market and you can sell or buy each of the goods. You can't do both for one good, but at least that gives you an option of being able to get those specific resources you need or that money that you might need.
So we've touched on this already, but I think one of the more interesting things in this game is that it's got very different routes, and you don't have to do all of them. You can have sections of this board that you don't even touch in a game. I've had games where I've fixed maybe one instrument, or I've barely even done the concert, or we've had games where we've never gone to the balcony, and then I've had games where I've focused on the balcony. So I really like that. You're pretty much always going to have patrons. You're always going to have to make instruments, which makes sense. That's the whole point of the game. You are a luthier. That's what you're going to have to be doing. But the other stuff you can choose, and I like that. And I like that even on the patrons themselves, other than the instrument that they want, the other stuff gives you an option of either you make them another instrument, or you do a concert, or you fix something, so you can really focus on those routes.
Yeah, and it can feel really different depending on which route you're going down. And it almost does encourage you to specialize on a route, because if you're playing the higher value token and going up that track, you get stronger and stronger bonuses. And for each of the tracks, you get a special card that you assign for one of the tokens that usually gives you a bonus in that specific location. So if I have that for example, the performance location, I'm going to want to try and do as many performances as I can to be able to get those rewards.
Yeah, and those do feel different too because the performance location is really rolling dice. So that one feels a little bit random. You can definitely plan for that because you can get a bunch of those inspiration tokens. You can put a higher person there because you're adding them to your dice, and as you build it up, you're getting stronger dice, you're getting re-rolls, all sorts of stuff. But it still is going to play a little bit more for folks who, are okay with that little bit of randomness. Whereas the when you're building stuff, that is really just resources. So you've got a little bit more control where you just know that you already have the resources for it.
Another way this game feels different is you start with a specific family, and that gives you start of game bonuses. So it's not ongoing effects, but it will change like how much money you have, maybe a track you might start higher up, different resources you have, and that can feel quite a bit different as well.
Yeah, I was surprised how different that felt actually. Like I had one that just let me start with one of my instruments in the finishing side. And I thought, I don't know if this is this good because it didn't get me much else. It was really good. And so I think that stuff, it makes more of a difference than you think that it does. And then another thing that it does, and there's quite a few of these, is you're only using some of the cards from a bunch of the different decks. So you've got, well, these aren't cards, these are actually cardboard things, but you've got 3 public goals that everyone's going towards. You've also only have the number of players plus 1 of each of the special powers for those special tokens that you have. You also have 2 of your own goals that you've got, that are your own personal goals no one else knows about. And then there's also just the different, like all of the different cards that do feel a little bit different. The different patrons, the different special patrons. So there are quite a few things in this game that are randomized that are gonna make each game feel different.
Yeah, and I think of those, for me, the personal objectives is definitely steered me more because that can pay off if you can fulfill the highest level. And it's nice just to have something at the beginning to give you a bit of a target.
Another way, of course, that the game is going to feel a little bit different is the different player counts. And we have so far only played this game at 2. We played it a bunch at 2. But we've only played it at 2, and I would be happy if I only ever played it at 2. I think it works really well at 2. The only things that really change is at the beginning of the game, you're going to put out a bunch of neutral tokens on a bunch of the chairs and instruments in the middle of the board. You're also going to have neutral tokens on a few of the goals, and you're going to have 1 less card available in the different rows. But really, it doesn't feel like you're missing anything, and there really is like a tight back and forth. And basically everything in this game is open information. So you can tell what the other person wants and what they need. So there's a lot of opportunity to mess with them, to do this thing that you know they can't do yet so that they can't do it later. And I like that. There's so much interaction. It's not necessarily mean. It's not created to be mean, but you can sure make it mean.
Yeah, you definitely can, and Sean definitely does. But at 2, what I also really like is it is just a very, very thinky game. And so if it does take a while to make the decisions, particularly at the beginning of just where you're placing those tokens and which token to put out, that's just going to take longer at more players. The flip side of that at a higher player game is there is going to be more uncertainty. You won't be as sure as to where people might be going, what tokens they're putting down. There will be more cards to choose from, but if there's only one of those cards you want, the odds seem higher that someone else will take it. So if you really like that being thrown into the mix and don't mind extra time, then I think it could work really well at 3. It would be quite long at 4, but I know some players do like really heavy games of this type at 4.
Yeah, it's going to be like a 3-hour game if you're playing this at 4. So just know that that's what it's going to be. But I know people who love to have a big, thinky 3-hour game that they're playing with 4 people, and it's going to probably keep you engaged as well, because there's always a lot to think about. But yeah, you're right. At 3 or 4, people are really, like, you've got almost no chance of doing the things you hope to do in the order that you hope to do them. People are just going to be messing with you right and left, which is great, which really means that you're going to be clawing for all of those things and to figure out how you're going to do it, and you're going to have this ever-changing puzzle, whereas at 2, you got a lot more control over that puzzle. You also are going to have more fighting for those first chairs. as well in the middle. But at 4, that really is going to be a competition.
Yeah, it is interesting because at 2, those start right at the beginning of the game. So right off the top, you're already blocked from certain positions, which is interesting. Whereas at 3, it'd be more of a race if a couple of you are building towards the same instrument.
Yeah, you've got more of an idea when you're choosing instruments, which ones maybe you want to shy away from. It also does have a solo mode, and this is a full solo mode where you're playing against a solo bot that's run by a deck of cards. And there is a bit of rules overhead. It'll take you a couple of games to fully get out of the rule book, but it really does play like an actual opponent, and it is a challenge. I had to score more than 100 points in order to beat it. And I like that in games. I like when I'm playing against an opponent that feels like I am playing the game.
Moving on to components, and this is the retail version, and it's beautiful. The art is stunning. It is by Vincent Dutrait, who does such a phenomenal job. There's so much unique art because all of the patrons are different. There are the different types of instruments, and everything looks so lovely.
Yeah, it looks really classy. It had to be a classy game because it is about classical music, and it really captures that feel. Everything really, it just feels like lovely and luxurious. I did take a peek at what is in the deluxe version of this game too, and it adds a lot of stuff. There's a big dice tower. All of your, instead of the little cardboard tokens, you've got wooden tokens. Everything's screen printed. All the resources are different shapes and stuff. And there's dual layer boards and stuff. But if I didn't even know that existed, just playing this, I would think, oh my goodness, this really has everything that you would want in the retail game. And from what I understand, there isn't anything that changes the game mechanically. So it is just stuff, if you love it to be pretty, that's going to make it a little bit prettier. If you're mostly worried about the mechanics, I believe this has got everything in the box.
Yeah, I think they've done a great job for the retail of still making it look really nice because all of the instruments are nice wooden tokens. The market token is a little like horse and cart, and I haven't found any issues with the cardboard tokens that get upgraded for the deluxe. The cardboard works fine totally. The
icons as well are really solid. This is a game that has a lot of moving parts, so this is a game where it can be a little bit tricky, but they do a really good job with that. The board is mostly good, but I do have one small complaint, and that is when you lose one of your patrons, you're supposed to lose 3 points, and there's nothing on your board to remind you of that fact, which we really noticed because we totally forgot about that for our first 3 games. I don't even know if we have ever done that yet, so we played without that rule. Honestly, the game works fine even if you don't do that, but it is supposed to be a rule in the game, and it doesn't remind you on the player board, so that is a little bit tricky.
But that is just one small complaint. There is also a player aid that does a really good job of just showing what all of the different symbols mean, and very importantly, walks you through all of the different steps for the beginning and end of a round.
So on to final thoughts, and as you may have guessed, this is a game that has really connected with us. This is totally the sort of thing that we like. This is just a solid, it really is rules-wise a midweight game, but decision space-wise, this is definitely a heavyweight game, and I love that. I love when a game isn't too hard to onboard people into. This is not something you want to play with someone who doesn't play games. This is definitely for, people who've played a few games for sure, but it's not too hard to teach people this game, but it's going to take a few games before you're any good at it at all.
Yeah, and I do really like games that you get better and better at the more you play as you're trying to figure out the efficiency puzzle. And it is interesting because this one, I would say, is quite a bit heavier than their first game, which is Distilled. So if you have played Distilled, just know that this does go up a notch in terms of the weight.
Yeah, and I know with Distilled too, I've talked to quite a few folks who expected that to be maybe a little bit heavier than it was. And so for those folks, good news. This is probably the weight that you expected Distilled to be. I didn't have that problem. I actually really, really like Distilled, but I have heard folks say that, but this is definitely that step up.
The other thing to note is that there is quite a bit of interaction, and really where that plays out is if other people have gone to the same space as you, they might choose your card first, and it could be the one you wanted. Or when resolving the different spots, a different location might be resolved before you were expecting it. So the nice thing with that is you do have to then be able to switch gears and do whatever you can in the best way possible. And some people really like that challenge. The flip side is some people might get very, very frustrated if you have a specific plan and that plan gets ruined.
Yeah, your plans are going to get ruined for sure. But I really like that interaction. I like that it's not specifically mean. There's nothing where you're like ruining something or taking away something, at least not directly. But I do like that whole mechanic of you don't know when things are going to resolve, even if you are on those things. And it reminds me a bit of Carnegie, and I really like that in Carnegie as well. And I think it's done really, really well here.
And I also just really like the theme. I think the theme is different. It's a really classy theme. And it's not something I had ever really considered before. I wasn't really invested in classical music and realizing that there's all these like famous people that made these instruments. And I have found this game interesting from somebody who's coming from like an outside perspective.
Yeah, I like that they've got the little stories about the different luthiers. I didn't know the word luthier. Now I know that it started with people who made lutes, and it's specifically just the people who make the stringed instruments, even though there are also wind instruments and percussion in this game. But that was great. And we've also listened to classical music every time we played that, so that's great too. I like when there's something like that that can add a little bit of ambiance to the game.
And it also just works really well at 2 players. If you are somebody that likes playing heavier Euro games at more players where there's more opportunity for people to mess with your plans, then I think it could work well for that too.
And that is it. Have you played Luthier? What did you think? And are there other classical music themed games that you have played that you like? I know Lacrimosa is one, but I know there must be a bunch more out there.
Thank you so much for watching. As usual, please like, subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you next time for another game.